Welcome to the Stanley Museum of Art's Unexpected Insights, a video series where we invite guests to discuss work from the collections. This week we'll discuss a Stoneware Platter by Warren MacKenzie. The Warren MacKenzie platter was selected by Clary Illian, who's our first guest, followed by Ellen Kleckner and Benjamin Smart. My name is Jennifer Miller. Our first guest is Clary Illian. She's a studio potter in Ely, Iowa, and she's also a graduate of the University of Iowa. After she finished her degree, she went and did an apprenticeship at the Bernard Leach Pottery in England. This is the same training that would have been experienced by Warren MacKenzie, whose work we'll be discussing. Clary has been a full-time utilitarian potter in Iowa since 1966. She held a sabbatical replacement position for 2 semesters at the University of Iowa, and she led numerous workshops across the United States and Canada. Welcome, Clary.
Thank you.
We look forward to hearing what you have to share with us.
Well, as Jennifer mentioned, Warren and I shared the same training. And because of that, and because for maybe a total of about 2 months, I actually made pots with Warren in his studio. So I think I have a pretty good idea about what he was up to. The man that we both studied with made it his life's aim to introduce to the West what he would have called the standards of the East in pottery. I would say not only the standards, but the visual vocabulary. And in fact, you can really see that in Warren's work. He was looking at the folk pottery of Japan, China, and Korea. And he also got from the Leach pottery a notion of pottery as something that satisfied utility, that was made with great ease and with a given set of materials. And you can really see that in this platter. His work is always very, very generous, very hearty, very, you might even say, understated, usually unembellished. However, that makes it sound a little bit generic and boring, but Warren's voice was unmistakable. He always made pots with the greatest economy of motion. It was a real treat to watch him make pots on the potter's wheel. They just flowed out of him as naturally as breathing. And he frequently said that he really didn't want ego to enter into the process. He just wanted to get out of the way and let the nature of the clay and the wheel flow through him. And I would say that sort of directness also characterized his approach to glazes. These glazes that he used probably had no more than 5-6 ingredients in them, and they did what those ingredients do naturally at the high temperatures that his kiln produced. Now, I would say that these green dots on the platter are a little bit festive for Warren. In fact, Warren was very suspicious of what I might call easy beauty. For some time, he also made porcelain, but he was never very happy with it. It was just too pretty a material. I do have right here a lovely faceted bowl, and this is a porcelain bowl, but the clay is not the pure white that you might think of when you think of porcelain, like Mingei porcelain. In fact, it's got a lot of impurities in it. It's quite grainy. And the glaze itself is a little bit like a very subdued jade. It's got a lot of little specks in it and some crackling. And I don't know if he would say this is an easy beauty, but somehow he was suspicious of his own work in porcelain. And I say that not to emphasize the negativity, but to throw a little light on what he was up to with the stoneware. Now, again, everything I've said might make it seem like his work would come off as a little bit generic, but his voice was unmistakable. Something about his proportional decisions, his decisions about glazes, which always were a little bit austere. You might say they had the kind of lure of a beautiful beach pebble. So he really was always, again, in the service of utility. And I think it's important that he be part of the museum's holdings. It's an art museum, but museums all over the world have artifacts from other cultures that were also made to satisfy utility. And now we can see the beauty in them.
That's a great insight. Thank you so much, Clary. Our next guest is from Cedar Rapids, Iowa. Her name is Ellen Kleckner, and she's currently the Iowa Ceramics Center and Glass Studio Executive Director.
Hi, Jennifer. Thank you so much for having me today to speak on this beautiful platter.
Insights, and I thought you could bring some insights from your background as an educator, as someone who is the executive director of one of the most stellar ceramics places that I've visited. And so it's just a real gem in the community. Ellen, as an artist, she works to investigate connections. So connections between place, material, ideas, and legacy. Her own artistic practices are amazing. Her artwork raises questions in the mind of the viewer. She's got a great sense of craft, and her artistic practice weaves together community engagement, material investigations, and collaboration. When you saw this platter that Clary picked out for us to discuss, what did it spark in you? What kind of insights do you have to share with us? And I'm going to share the screen and let you be full screen.
Okay. Well, thanks, Jennifer, so much. I'm really happy to be able to participate in this conversation, especially being able to speak with both Clary and Ben about this piece. I think both of them provide wonderful insight, especially from sort of the utilitarian perspective of this piece. I was really excited about actually the most exciting thing to me was the form. I love the big, open, generous shape of the platter and the wonderful surface that you are able to really see from that open form. And I thought it was just lovely. I think Warren has had a long standing sort of pillar, especially in this region, when it comes to ceramics. And he really has been a bridge for the ceramic community in the Midwest region. So much so that there's even a movement called Mingei-Sota, which is kind of coined after him in the community in which he developed, and is now in the second and third generation of his students, some of which have even taught here in our community studio. And the really wonderful thing to me about Warren's work is he is this bridge between both the Leach Hamada tradition and also into the contemporary space that we now have ceramics as an art form, studio craft. So he really, when he came back over and settled in Minnesota, he sparked this wonderful community that was able to look forward at what ceramics kind of became within America, especially within the Midwest region. But it really drew from this wonderful legacy of both Hamada and the Leach tradition, which intertwined together. So I see him really as a key bridge. And that bridge even extending to Clary and this really wonderful family tree that has grown from him starting in Minnesota and then kind of, just really growing outward. And when I was a young student, those were some of the first pots that I was introduced to by my professors. And now in our community classes, we actually introduce a lot of those same thoughts about utilitarianism, the craft, as well as the beauty of the pieces of pottery. And we have seen a huge interest in people wanting to learn about how to create pottery here at the Iowa Ceramic Center and Glass Studio. I think that living in an increasingly digitized world, where we often aren't able to really experience things in the haptic space, studio craft and studio pottery has become even more valued and essential to have in our everyday lives. To have something that's handmade with intention, but still has the consideration and beauty of a fine piece of art. It's just really a space that you can't find many other places in this world, to be able to engage with something so intentfully made on an everyday basis. It's the classic mug, and I think the thing that's so wonderful about this piece, once again, is the size. Just the sheer size and openness. I imagine that being at someone's holiday table, or just a big, beautiful salad in it, and some of which Ben will share some images of his. And but I really see that as a generous form, and that's really what Warren created, was this generous, open community of ceramics, which is very prevalent still here in the Midwest region, but really extends all over this country.
Great, thank you. I visited Warren's studio in Minnesota several times and helped load up several of these platters.
Yeah.
So I also imagined picking it up, and I completely understand what you're saying about responding to that open form, just how beautiful it is.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks for sharing your insight.
He was just such a wonderful spirit too. I mean, just willing to speak, and I think he was very much an educator and a community builder. And to me, like, that's what is embodied in the form of the platter so well.
What a legacy.
Yeah, pretty awesome.
All right, thanks.
Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Yeah, we're going to go on to hear from Ben next, and then, all right. So when Clary Illian showed me the platter by Warren MacKenzie that she selected for this particular video, I was really excited about inviting a local chef to share their insights. So today I'm welcoming Ben Smart to the conversation. Welcome, Ben.
Thank you.
So Benjamin Smart's culinary career got started shortly after he studied at the University of Iowa. He was here at Iowa as an undergraduate and got a Bachelor in Science degree in geology. After completing that degree, which is really cool, by the way,
yeah.
After completing that degree, he went up to Kirkwood Community College and pursued a culinary degree. After that, he landed at the prestigious Herb Farm, which is still located right outside of Seattle, Washington.
Mm-hmm.
Working at Herb Farm, Chef Smart was promoted to executive sous chef, where he was allowed to strongly influence the menu. He created dishes inspired by produce that was grown on the restaurant's 5.5-acre farm. He spent nearly 5 years at Herb Farm before returning back to Iowa City with his family and opening a few local restaurants. The first one he helped open is Big Grove Brewery in Solon. He was the executive chef there, and he mentors younger chefs, and he's just really influential in the community. So I'm really pleased to have him here with us, and his accolades are many. For example, in 2017, Ben was highlighted by Plate magazine as one of the 30 chefs to watch in the country. In 2018, he was awarded Restaurateur of the Year by Iowa Restaurant Association. He currently lives in Iowa City with his wife and 2 young children, and we welcome him to share his insights with us about Warren's pottery. Thanks.
Absolutely. Yeah, thanks for having me. I was really excited about this project when you brought the idea and presented it to me, I think that there's a really beautiful synergy between multiple art forms. And I'm always fascinated in the kind of the way that art forms can intersect. So in this case, it's the ceramist, or if I'm saying that correctly, and then I guess my art form or my craft, which is food, it's cooking. So I do think that there's this really kind of beautiful transition, because at some point, I've been thinking about this a lot actually, because like at some point, somebody makes this plate, Warren makes this platter, and he has to glaze it or throw it in the kiln, or I'm not sure what all those steps are, but at a certain point, what he's done, his contribution to this art is over. And now he relinquishes his control, right? And at that point, that's the exciting thing, is I get to take this platter and be inspired by it. Food can be as simple as sustenance and just food on a plate, but to me, it can be so much more. And when you have something as beautiful and as kind of like stark as this platter was, it really can kind of inform what goes on the plate. So I would love to be able to like cook something for you or show you a bunch of ingredients and like kind of explain like what I'm thinking about when I'm plating something. So I thought the next best thing would maybe just, I made a slideshow of a bunch of food photos that are all my food photos through the years, and kind of just explain a little bit, try to explain, because it's sometimes hard to articulate what I'm thinking about when I'm putting food on a plate, what kind of like the color scheme or anyway, all those things. So I'm going to try to screen share here and yeah, do a little slideshow for you. So the first thing that I was struck by was obviously the color of the platter. It's big. It's like 19 inches. It's green with those black lines in it. And so the colors that I put on the plate, I want to be complementary. And there's a lot of different ways to do that. Some you can kind of, go like the kaleidoscope, you can get like greens and reds and purples and try to like really highlight those colors and try to have them accent what's already there on the platter. The other thing, like this one right here, is a little more gradational. And right here, especially all these shades of green, I think something monochromatic would look amazing on that platter. So you have that big green platter, and then everything that you put on that could be shades of green, and that can be really impactful. Or you could go another route where there's the contrasting colors, like this dish here, where it's brighter reds or pinks. The other thing that I'm always thinking about is kind of the sense of movement on a platter, if that makes sense. Like there's always something that kind of creates this feeling of motion, and we achieve that by various ways, by plating with lines and curvature, but the three lines on that platter kind of give me a sense of direction. So I would probably plate something that complements those lines, that maybe is not completely in line, but maybe kind of arcs off of it, and it gives this sense of the flow to the food. If I plated something at 90 degrees to those lines, it kind of has this like, it stops short. It's like truncated. I don't know how to describe it other than that. So a lot of it's feel, but I see a platter like that, and that's what I'm thinking about when I'm putting things on the plate. I don't want them to look too contrived or to look too kind of like messed with, a lot like this piece. I mean, that's a lot of intricate plating, but when you look at it, it kind of just looks like it was meant to be there. I don't want anything to feel like it was too precious, or it took me 30 minutes to plate, or something like that. So I really think about that a lot when I'm plating, and again, the platter, the colors of it, if there's a pattern on it, all of that interacts with what I'm doing and changes how I would approach plating something like that. The thing that I think is really fascinating too is like at some point the same thing happens to me, is like I've done what I'm going to do. I put the food on the plate. Hopefully it's delicious. Hopefully it's beautiful. But at a certain point, my part's done, and I present it to a table or guests or my family, and now they get to interpret it how they will, which is really amazing, because it's all interpreted, right? I mean, what Warren was trying to get people to feel or think about, and what I am, I mean, those exist within me. They're not for you. You have to create, like, you decide how it makes you feel when you eat the food and when you see the platter. So it's kind of really interesting how it all works together and how it plays a part and informs one another. So I kind of wax poetic about it too, but I would urge any student of art or anybody who loves food or to just think about that next time that they're with their family or or at a nice restaurant, and kind of see how those things kind of change the experience, how the presentation or the service piece that the food is on, like how it changes how you feel, right? And like who you're with, that changes how you feel too. If you're with loved ones, that's a different feel. That the food will taste different. The experience will be different. If you just got done with a board meeting and you're super stressed out and you have to entertain business clients or whatever, like that's a totally different feel. And how those two experiences, those are night and day, even though the food could be the exact same. So that stuff always just fascinates me. And I'm really, again, I'm excited to be a part of this project, and I'm looking forward to kind of having more discussion about the interaction of food and art and all those things. So thanks again for having me.
Yeah, great. Your images gave me a lot to think about, and I'm going to turn over now to the group conversation where we bring Clary and Ellen and Ben together to riff off of each other's presentations. So thank you so much for those beautiful
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you.
And
thank you.
on to the next. All right. So we had a lot of themes come up in those individual presentations, but I'm interested to hear what you heard in each other's voices and in each other's ideas that you want to respond to. So I'm mostly going to listen during this part, but I might raise a few questions myself too. Who wants to start?
I'll start.
Yeah, okay, go ahead, Clary.
I just loved what you had to say, Ben.
Thank you.
And I love, there are several things. One is the idea of plating as decisions about the formal aspects of the work, shape, color, texture. And I could tell by what you showed in your slideshow that you already are using some really interesting ceramics or pieces upon which to display it. I just found that really thrilling. I think you're right there.
Yeah. I mean, I think that the platter that you use, or the service piece, can be every bit as much a part of it. I mean, it should be. I mean, it could just be a white plate, a blank canvas, and that's one particular statement. But I mean, there was a couple dishes that same presentation, that same food on a white plate just lands flat. So I very much love to use the service piece as a part, not just as a piece itself. Like I like it to become part of the presentation. So thank you. There's a couple of things that I picked up off of what you were saying that I maybe wanted to dig into a little bit more. You mentioned a couple of things that I thought were kind of interesting. One, you mentioned something about a visual vocabulary, and that really struck me. And I don't know, I'd love for you to maybe talk a little bit more about that. Because I use a term like a flavor palette, right? So it's like a painter's palette, but of flavors, and how certain colors or flavors really work together. And I'm wondering, is the visual vocabulary kind of in the same vein as that, or can you talk a little bit more about that?
I think it's in the same vein in the sense of a nationality or an ethnic group having a set of flavor components. I think that's the analogy I was trying to make, that the vocabulary in the case of the leach pottery came from the East. And that might seem self-evident right now, but when I went to the leach pottery in the mid-60s, what American potters were looking at was Scandinavian work.
Sure.
Which at that time was very hard edged. The glazes were completely different from what you see in Warren's work. So that's what I had in mind.
Yeah, the one other thing, well, there's a lot of things that I wrote down. One that just struck me that I just loved was just the economy of motion you said that Warren had. And I think that there's a lot of beauty. I see the same thing as it relates to a kitchen. You know, we call it the dance, right? When you're super busy and, you know, it should be your hair's on fire, everything's going crazy, but the best cooks are cool and they move with purpose and they're not spinning around in circles. Moving fast doesn't mean you're doing more work. And so I love that, just the economy of motion, that stuck with me. And then the idea that some medians were too easy, like easy beauty, it's almost too pretty. And I kind of liken that to using a bunch of luxury ingredients. It's like, yeah, it's good. I can put truffles and foie gras and all these things on a plate and it'll be tasty, but it's not, that's not what it doesn't get me as excited as taking something more humble and making it like super elevated. So that kind of stood out to me. And then something Ellen said about bridging the gap between tradition and contemporary, I think is really interesting, because I'm always trying to find that balance as well, because, cooking as a craft specifically is, there's nothing new under the sun, but there's a lot of newer generation of chefs who are using all sort of modern techniques, and maybe you've heard the term molecular gastronomy, things like that are trying to recreate or push forward cuisine. And there's been some really interesting things happening, but if it's not rooted in tradition, if it's not just like at the core delicious, then it's kind of all for naught. So I'd be interested in hearing maybe a little bit more about where the balance between tradition and contemporary is, or maybe there isn't one. There's great things from both. I don't know. Like, I'm not in your world, so I'd love to hear maybe.
I think it's similar to the way there's such a history within cooking and cuisine. There's also this really amazing history of ceramic, just by the nature of the, I'd say, material objectness of it. We have the ability to have artifacts because ceramics in itself is created and it's made hard, right? From being able to go through the firing process. And a lot of museums have these wonderful collections of artifacts that are ceramic based. And so we have this amazing history that we're able to look at, but then also it's a very alive media. It's a very alive, right now there's amazing people working within this craft, but the basic technologies haven't really changed too dramatically. You have to heat it up, and the different ways that we heat up clay to turn it into ceramic have changed over the years, but so a lot of the basic technologies haven't really changed. And there are some new tools that have been added to it, but it's kind of that bridge where how do you bring the individual voice in while still sort of having this eye or connection to the past. And so for some people, it's a choice to actually have a straight kind of break from that. And some people really hold on to that legacy and get really rooted and grounded. And that might be regional, it might be stylistic, it might be cultural, how they choose. I think today it definitely becomes a choice of the maker and how they're going to kind of choose to have that bridge for them between. So it's kind of that space, it's there, and the choice is whether or not to, how much to engage and bring forth, or kind of to make a path and just move forward. So I really enjoyed what you had to say, Ben, about collaboration and participation of the viewer or participant, I would say, in a dinner. And a lot of times in art, we talk about the viewer as the other person who's experiencing this work of art, aside from the artist. But at a certain point, in the same way that you say you kind of let the food go to the participant, the person who's going to enjoy it, art also kind of gets let go into the world, and especially something like functional ceramics, it gets sort of handed over for use. And the person who will be using it experiences it in its own way and is able to interpret it kind of through their own use in their own way. That space of collaboration, I think, is a really interesting space with that cuisine offers, as well as pottery. Kind of the user then also becomes
Yeah,
the
it's
viewer, and there's just wonderful kind of space that happens.
absolutely. I totally agree. It's not just what you create, it's how it's interpreted. That's always fascinating. The last thing that I wrote down is just the idea that, you know, we all know our world is just increasingly digitized, and being able to create experiences through art, or you said haptics, like your hands, right? Using your tactile, using your feelings. You can't replicate that, right, in other forms. And the same thing, I would like to think that how we do that in the restaurant industry is we bring people together. We create experiences that don't happen on social media or on any sort of online platform. It's like engaging, not only with the food or the art, but it's with each other. So it's like, it's kind of the foundation with which real like human experience can happen on top of. And I don't know, I want social media. There's so many great things that come from technology, but I don't know if I fear it, but I don't want to go too far away from what really brings joy in people's lives. And I think that I'd like to think that what I do and what you all do with art is such a huge part of that. And I hope that it never is diminished. I hope that it always is seen for how great it really is, because that's the human experience in my mind. It's not creating followers online and all of those things. So I don't know.
That's very well said. And in a lot of ways, you can take a picture and you can try to describe a meal you prepared, but you're never going to really get the true experience until you participate in person and taste and experience that. And I think that's a really special space that we just can never quite virtually capture. And I'm happy we can't. In the same way with wonderful pottery, there's things you can look at it in a picture, but by using it, you feel the different, maybe slight undulations and nuances that you wouldn't be able to experience any other way. So I think that's a lot of really kind of just great similarities between, you have to be able to have the experience in person.
And yeah, and I have a couple of young kids, and we were talking a little bit off camera about my daughter got into like a pottery class and just opened up a whole new world to her. And that's so amazing. You don't get that by even like going to a museum, yes, but like really getting hands-on, like that tactile feel, like being there and experiencing it. That's those types of experiences I feel like are rarer and rarer. And so when I get to see, especially through like my daughter's eyes, her experience something new for the first time, that's really exciting. I love that so much. So art and food and music and things like that are kind of what it brings me the most joy when I see my children kind of like explore or experience something for the first time.
It strikes me that both the potter and the good chef, what you're trying to do is get people to slow down and be in the moment and notice all the details of what they're experiencing without that internal dialogue whirling around inside and keeping you from a very direct experience with the object and the food.
Yeah, that's well said.
Yeah, and with pieces of pottery that we live with, like this one, it's slowing down, paying attention, and using it as over and over and over in my life for coffee, for tea. So having these in our lives, but also in the museum, what can a platter like this do in the museum? It can communicate messages about what happened. Why is there the Mingei movement in 1920s in Japan? People older might appreciate that history and why that craft movement evolved in Japan at the time it did, and then how it moved from Mingei to, through Warren's work, people can also go back in time and understand the connections and the similar pressures maybe of industrialization during the Mingei time. But I'm not an expert on history, but I'm just trying to bring it back to the museum, the role of the museum, and then we can close it out. So Clary mentioned something about the importance of seeing this kind of work in the museum. Do you have any thoughts about that to close out this conversation? The role of museums, or seeing things in a museum and bringing things to life, or?
Well, I think what's always in the back of the minds of people who are involved in crafts is a little bit of a status hierarchy. I don't know that it happens in chefdom, but people who work in clay have been sensitive for several decades about whether they're art with a capital A or not. So that's why I touched upon the importance of that pot being in the museum, is you need to just keep breaking that division between a high art and low art down, because it's meaningless.
Yeah.
Interesting. So do some people consider ceramics that work with clay to be a lesser form of art? Is that what you were saying?
Mm-hmm.
A little bit?
Ellen, actually, I'm such an old fuddy-duddy that that maybe Ellen, is more in touch with.
Yeah, I think that there tends to be hard lines drawn with utility. So maybe not as much as the media itself, which would be clay, but rather the intentional use of it, like the use.
Sure.
The intentional use can draw into question this hierarchy that Clary is describing. And I think that now what's one thing that's really unique and wonderful about what Warren did is he learned and was trained in something which would be a pottery, which was almost industrial. So there was different people, different hands at different stages making standardware, which would be something that you pick from a catalog. But Warren really was part of also what we call the studio craft movement. So it was one artist from the beginning to the end of the process making this piece. So with intention, it was the same person who, just like if you were to start by gessoing a canvas to then paint, like one artist in their studio painting, it's one artist in their studio starting from wedging the clay, creation of the form, decoration, and finishing. So it really does become like the individual is in that piece. And to me, that's what makes it really this wonderful space and this bridge between art, craft, and it's this wonderful ambiguous space that I think it's really critical that these pieces are still within the museum and displayed alongside of, we'll say, maybe more traditional painting would be, because there's as much individuality and intention in that piece as any other artwork you would have. So
sure. Yeah, that's really interesting what you said about the use of the art. If it's a platter that you put food on, then suddenly it's a plate. It's just more pedestrian in some way. But that's interesting. And what it instantly made me think about is just from my own career, the idea that, probably pre like Food Network, the idea of like going into the restaurants that's something you did if you didn't have a lot else going on, or if you didn't have you're a burger flipper or something. I don't know if that's the same parallel, but the idea that it's kind of a pedestrian job. I've always resented that, because I've met some of the smartest, hardest working, just like geniuses in the industry. So to kind of pigeonhole something as a lesser form than another is just so interesting to me. So I've always fought back against that idea. I'm very, very proud of our industry, and I'm sure ceramists are very proud of being able to work with clay, and like that's fascinating. So many parallels.
Yeah, and the intentionality of a few materials, which Clary called ingredients, that went into the glazes that melt at just the right time, and the impact of heat and process and timing and getting it all right. And there's just A lot of things going through my mind thanks to the three of you. Thank you so much for sharing your insights.
Thanks for putting us all together, Jennifer. I think it was
Yeah.
a great
Thank you.
conversation to have.
Especially Clary, thank you for choosing this piece that we discussed.
I have to tell you, I participated in a webinar yesterday from England, from the Leach Pottery. And this was a better conversation than we had. It really was. I think it's that the salting of the different crafts coming together. It's always more interesting than not having them.
After COVID's over, we can all get together in real life and enjoy some food and drink out of some real pots.
We can all bring our pots to show you then.
Awesome. Awesome.
Well, and I have to tell you, my mouth has been watering ever since we started.
Oh, those greens. It's like I want like a big green salad.
I wanted to know what the green was also, the green in your work, Ben. I was wondering what the flavors were too. It went by just visually, but
Yeah. I would have to look back at the exact photo you were talking about. There's a lot going on in those. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, of course. This was fun.
It surely was.
All right. Take care.